I have a confession. I'm addicted to the news.
Breaking news.
Jared Kushner's security clearance.
The Mueller report.
Alito came before this committee, and he had the chance to tell us that he thought Roe was egregiously wrong, make that observation about that case, and instead he hid that sentiment. He said instead,
Roe versus Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. It was decided in 1973, so it's been on the books for a long time. It has been challenged on a number of occasions, and I discussed those yesterday, and the Supreme Court has reaffirmed the decision.
So looking back, he looks a lot like a sleeper agent predetermined to attack Roe.
Information on the Cohen stories.
I'm admitting I have a problem. That's the first step to recovery, right?
Who wouldn't disclose what he was up to until he had the majority that he needed to change the legal standard and destroy the legal precedent.
You've seen the news? I mean, all the news. Because I have. That's right. I've seen all the news. All right, fine, I haven't seen all the news.
I want to talk about Sheldon Whitehouse and his continuous barrage, relentless, as it must seem to them, against the Supreme Court.
I often pass out with the TV blaring and my phone in my hand mid-article. Yeah, as a kid, I hated the news.
Packing the court destroys the court.
Since 2020, we've seen proposals to resurrect the failed, misguided idea of court packing.
There has been considerable debate about the efforts of the radical left and the Democrat Party to pack the United States Supreme Court.
The New York Stock
I didn't understand why my parents would watch it. The news was the opposite of interesting.
Leftist leader Kamal Jumblat was buried today,
It sounded like someone was reading a textbook.
And that's the way it is.
My sense is the court has already been packed. It has been packed as the result of a very long and expensive effort run by a handful of secretive right-wing billionaires through a bunch of front groups. The tally of the cost of the operation has risen from the original $250 million estimate of the Washington Post to now $580 million spent on trying to make sure that those billionaires succeeded in what has been characterized in this room as the long effort to make this a conservative court.
Yo, killing me with this! The news is the only thing that interests me. Don't tell me about your favorite show. You know, your show is boring.
This Supreme Court is stacked. This Supreme Court is crooked. The Supreme Court is on the take. Everybody knows it, and it's come out. Sorry, guys.
It's inconsequential. My show, the news, is the best. The characters are so complex. The storylines are filled with surprises.
Here today because the Supreme Court is playing out of bounds of the ethics rules for federal judges. Justices read the ethics rules in unique and eccentric ways, and when they're caught out of bounds, they refuse to allow any investigation of the facts.
I'm watching news, reading news, like I'm cramming for an exam.
Jim, can you come help me with homeschool? Jim, can you help me with the laundry?
Just a minute.
The personal hospitality problems I've been pursuing began with Justice Scalia, who took more than 7 dozen undisclosed hunting vacations. Most people know of 2, the one where he was on the Air Force Two manifest with Dick Cheney, and the one where he died. There were 70 plus more. It was systematized. Some intermediary would ask the owner of an expensive resort, often a commercial property, to extend to Scalia a personal invitation to the resort. Even where the owner was someone he'd never met, Scalia treated as personal hospitality because of the personal invitation and failed to disclose the vacations.
Acting is flawless.
We have been talking about the national emergency on this broadcast for 20 damn years.
Gun industry advocates, fossil fuel folks, and Republican political figures often tagged along. No reasonable reading of the term personal hospitality would cover this, but the Supreme Court let this go on for years.
I'm just embarrassed by what I considered news prior to this whole pandemic.
When I challenged the court about this practice, Exhibit 1, I got a blow-off letter. Exhibit 2, Basically, nothing to see here.
We've done this right, and we really have done this right.
The heroes and the villains are replenished every day. Every night is a cliffhanger.
Robert Mueller may be ready to submit his findings.
Remember when Harry and Meghan moving to LA was considered breaking news?
They've announced they're stepping back from their royal duties.
Well, this is really their own sort of Brexit.
I guess those were the good old days.
It is astonishing that you could possibly believe anything that these people say.
Sometimes I try to rationalize my news addiction.
And I watch everything. All the shows.
My daughters are getting tired of my jokes. Believe it or not, how that can happen, I have no idea.
Well, some of them. I'm not a masochist.
So then I asked the circuit courts what they thought about this conduct. I went 0 for 13 on answers. Oh, that would be Exhibit 3. I went 0 for 13 on answers, so I then sent another letter saying I hope their silence didn't indicate some kind of coordinated obstruction. Exhibit 4. I also scheduled a subcommittee hearing. Presto, I was told the Financial Disclosure Committee would examine how the exemption was interpreted. That's Exhibit 5. Almost a year later, 2 weeks before the recent news about Justice Thomas broke, the Judicial Conference updated its guidance to clarify that this sort of non-disclosure violates the law. Exhibit 6.
Anderson, this is inexcusable. I mean, it's just inexcusable.
I've even gotten to the point where I'm watching BBC News, the news of our cousins across the pond.
The former President Donald Trump says he will head to Georgia on Thursday to turn himself in after his indictment for trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election results in the state. Mr. Trump is expected to be booked, fingerprinted and photographed when he surrenders in Atlanta. Posting on his Truth Social platform, the former president described the case as a politically motivated witch hunt.
Maybe I just like the opening of the news program, where there's just the world spinning and there's no sound, and then suddenly it's...
Earlier, a judge said Mr. Trump set Mr. Trump's bail at $200,000 and placed strict conditions on his use of social media.
I'll tell myself, I'm trying to be an informed citizen.
The reality is, it was obvious to anybody that watched. These people were lying. They said what they had to say.
But I love the drama.
He is a racist.
The mystery.
Mueller is not expected to.
Is there any other footage of Robert Mueller than this?
I have no evidence that any federal judge outside the Supreme Court ever used the personal invitation trick. And the Judicial Conference, made up of other judges, firmly shut it down. Regular judges would be loath to use that trick because a complaint about it would go into a proper process and would be investigated and measured against the law and the ethics code, and a conclusion would be reached, and that conclusion could be embarrassing. Only Supreme Court justices refuse to allow their conduct to be investigated or reviewed. My bill would fix that. Here's an example of the no investigations problem. The key fact to determine whether Justice Thomas was bound by law to recuse himself from the first January 6th committee case was what he knew about his wife's insurrection activities and when he knew it. On that fact, the lawfulness of his initial recusal decision turns. Yet Thomas has never been officially asked that question. It's a cover-up in plain view.
Kellyanne and George Conway talk about at night. I know what my wife and I talk about at night. The news.
Hell, they used to talk about it on the shows. Well, you know, they're very carefully worded answers, you know. We know because of this ruling, this ruling, and this ruling. They were lying. Because with all their moral compass and all their belief system, they have no trouble with lying.
If we go down this road, how much will your utility bill go up? How much gas prices will go up? We need to actually talk more honestly about that.
If we spend $50 trillion, or however much it takes, to make the United States carbon neutral by 2050, how much will it lower world temperatures?
Senator, that depends on the rest of the world.
Do you
to
believe-
create harmonized incentives to
Do
reduce
you believe in the
emissions.
tooth fairy?
No, sir.
Do you believe in the Easter Bunny?
No, sir.
Do you believe that Jimmy Hoffa died of natural causes?
Saturdays are when I realize the gravity of my news addiction. Saturdays used to be my favorite day of the week. Now, ugh, I hate Saturdays.
And Sheldon Whitehouse is a badass. Never give up and never surrender. And he's not going to.
Most exactly 5 years ago, I sent around this binder to all of my Senate colleagues, in which I compiled some of the most compelling warnings about the economic risks associated with climate change. Last week, I sent your staffs an updated version of the binder. Here it is. As you can see, the warnings keep piling up. Have fun with the light reading.
Crack away! There's no good news on Saturday. Even my cable news dealers are forced to air non-news filler programs on Saturday.
How much money needs to be proven that these guys have gotten? How many houses need to be proven that these guys have been given? How many millions of miles on private jets and yachts and whatever else the fuck do these guys have to get before we decide, you know what? That's something we might want to look into.
The inside is completely dry.
Look at our national debt. One thing that stands out is how much of it was incurred as a result of exogenous shocks to the economy. Consider the 2008 financial crisis, which blew up the financial security of families and businesses across the country and reduced government revenues for a decade.
I just wait for Sunday. On Sunday, there are the all-important Sunday news shows.
So the border wall.
Deloitte predicts the differential between being responsible and reckless about climate could sum to more than $220 trillion globally between now and 2070. Some of these warned of risks are already upon us. Already, climate-related natural disasters increase federal spending on disaster assistance, flood insurance, crop insurance, and other programs we fund. But this is just the beginning. It will certainly get worse, much worse, particularly if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees. We are on a bad trajectory. It's time for us all to wake up and face the problem before coastal cities flood with water or Southwest cities can't get water. I hope we can fend that off with action if we snap into focus on the danger.
I almost expect every show to begin with previously on the news.
Is it possible that these guys are bought and paid for?
We need to head off climate change at the oil spigot. That means taking on the fossil fuel industry's increasingly desperate lies and its well-funded political juggernaut that does such evil in this building. We know how to solve this problem. We just don't do it because fossil fuel fingers creep through so many corners of the Capitol.
Sunday news shows are like the talking dead for us news zombies.
Will you run against President Trump either as a Republican?
I mean, hell, Robert's wife works for one of the largest law firms in the country, simply her job being Robert's wife. She goes around and says, yes, you should come to this law firm. She's a headhunter. By the way, my husband's on the Supreme Court, perhaps you've heard of him, and he thinks you should go there too. She gets paid $10 million a year. But it's not Roberts. Get the fuck out of here.
Most importantly, Sunday news shows mean tomorrow is Monday, which means 24 hours of news.
In the time it took me to deliver this speech, around 6,000 Hiroshima bombs of excess heat energy were put into our oceans.
We're counting on you nerds to solve it. Go science, please.
They say that the Democrats want to stack the court. They say that the Democrats are trying to get in their own judges. Donald Trump appointed a third of the judges, a little more than that, in fact, a third of them. And obviously, a very important third of the most crooked Supreme Court since Reconstruction.
Every day, it's getting worse. We completely underestimate how bad things are going to get. Completely. Even people who care about climate change and believe that it's real and aren't in tow to the fossil fuel industry and its dark money, they still completely underestimate how bad this is going to get.
But hey, man, they're Republicans. You get what you pay for. And if you didn't already know that Republicans were bought and paid for, then you haven't watched enough of my channel. I'm Zachariah, Lone Star Liberal. Like and subscribe. Y'all take it easy.
Can't wait for Monday. What happened to my life?
Well, my aspiration is to, be in a teen tit film like that guy who played Horatio. You know, he was in Malibu Bikini Beach Shop. Well, other than that, take over the world domination, rule everything, rich, powerful, that sort of stuff.